Hi, everybody. This is Skip Alzheimer, and I'm checking to see if my microphone's working, and it is. This is the AV Geeks lunchtime streaming show, and we just watched some footage of some sperm. What's interesting is I've posted this sperm footage years ago, like maybe more than a decade ago, on different platforms, and lots of people have comments about it, but only one person said, hey, that's not human sperm. That's some sort of mammal sperm. That's a small mammal. He didn't ID it necessarily, but so I got a bunch of this footage from a reproductive research lab, and some of the cans of film say rabbit sperm. This particular reel, which I think is the best of all the ones that we have, I don't know. It didn't identify what it was, but I'm guessing it might have been rabbit sperm or a mammal that gnaws. A mammal that gnaws, that you ask? Here's a film about that. Enjoy.
Most of the mammals that inhabit our Earth are rodents, mammals that gnaw. They're easy to tell apart from other mammals. They're usually small, and they have long, curved front teeth that grow throughout their lives. These incisor teeth are not only shaped differently from those of other mammals, but they're also constructed differently. The front surfaces are hard enamel. The back surfaces, softer dentine. As the teeth are used, softer dentine wears down faster than the harder enamel, and a chisel-like shape is maintained. Continual growth makes up for the continual wear, and the other way around. The continual wear keeps them from growing too long. When you compare the teeth of the gnawing mammals with those of the hoofed mammals, the difference is easy to spot. The incisors of a deer are small. The molars in back are larger. These are used for grinding up the grass and leaves that a deer eats. The molars in the meat-eating mammals are sharper. And the canines, not the front incisors, are long and sharp. These are used by the meat-eaters for tearing flesh. But notice as we move the jaw of a gnawing mammal that the front incisors are longest. Their chisel-like shape is suited for getting at particular kinds of food in their diets. Kangaroo rats eat seeds. Squirrels gnaw holes in the hard shells of nuts to get at the food inside. But the most common foods for most gnawing mammals are shoots, grass, and other plants. Some rodents will eat almost anything. Some eat berries, some mushrooms. and a few eat insects and other small animals. Whatever the rodent's diet, each food-gathering trip is dangerous because most rodents are small. There are always larger meat eaters around. Hawks and eagles thrive on rodents. So do snakes. And some medium-sized meat-eating mammals, too. So the gnawing mammals are usually secretive animals. They stay close to home, and that home is usually a place fairly safe from predators. Many, like the woodchuck, burrow in the ground. So do prairie dogs, who live together by the hundreds in enormous networks of tunnels. Many kinds of mice build their nests in grass. Others, like the pack rat, use grass and other materials to line their nests in rock crevices. Some take to the trees. Because of their sharp claws, squirrels are well adapted for climbing. And so, many make homes in trees. Some in natural holes. Others in nests they construct of twigs and leaves. Some gnawing mammals smaller than squirrels, like this deer mouse, also live in trees. So do larger ones, like the porcupine. Unlike most rodents, which depend upon escape for survival, the porcupine carries an effective defense around with it. Muskrats and beavers build lodges in the water to keep out of the way of predators. But eventually, each animal must come up from its burrow or down from its tree or back to the shore for food. And when it does, it exposes itself to danger. To help warn them of approaching danger, the rodents have a number of highly developed senses. Most depend upon extremely sensitive hearing to make them aware of danger. Others use their sense of smell. Few of them have very sharp vision. However, like other mammals that are also preyed on by meat eaters, the gnawers have eyes so placed that it's possible for them to see danger coming from almost any direction without moving their heads. Darkness helps hide those that feed at night. Their large eyes and keen sense of smell make it possible for them to maneuver in dim light. Darkness hides them from some hunters, but not from those that hunt in darkness. Most rodents that feed during the day are hidden by their small size and coloration. Some rodents use warning signals to tell others of danger. Prairie dogs signal with a chirp-like bark. That's why they're called prairie dogs. Beavers slap their tails on the water. Other beavers hear this and dive below the surface for safety. Chipmunks chirp a danger signal. There are other adaptations that help protect them from predators. Chipmunks have special cheek pouches that can be stuffed with large amounts of food, which reduces the number of dangerous food-gathering trips. Food can then be taken home to be eaten or stored in safety. The habit of putting food away for a later meal is more common among the gnawing mammals than among any other mammals, except humans. Squirrels are well known for burying and hiding nuts. Whether they actually remember where they've hidden them or just sniff them out is questionable. Many nuts in the ground are forgotten and sprout into trees. Pine squirrels gather cones. Pack rats are great collectors. That's where they get their name. And the beavers cut twigs and saplings to take to their lodges. They anchor these on bottoms of streams for use as food in the winter. Storing food makes it possible for many of these small plant-eating animals to remain active during the cold months when food is normally scarce. The rodents have learned to eat the food humans store. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of crops are destroyed each year by rodents. Some rodents carry disease. The spread of plagues has been blamed on the black rat. Most rodents reproduce quickly. Partly for this reason, the gnawing mammals are important aids in scientific studies. They're used in research on nutrition, behavior, and medicine. And they're even kept as pets. If any one word could be used to describe the gnawing mammals, it is successful. They have managed to spread to and thrive in almost every part of our Earth, from deserts to much colder climates. Some live in high mountains, and some tunnel most of their lives beneath the ground. Only a few are fairly large. For example, the capybara in South America may weigh 200 pounds. But most rodents are small. In kinds and numbers, however, the mammals that gnaw far outnumber all the other mammals on our Earth.
Gnaw. That was a kind of serendipitous thing, the sperm footage, and then revealing that it was rabbit footage, and then having that film lined up. Sometimes that happens. It's like, oh, I could show this film. Great. Let's see. We've been scanning a bunch of Coronet films, and so here is Our Basic Civil Rights. And I don't know if there's any people of color in this film. I think it's Lily White, which a lot of Coronet films were of the time. Anyways, Our Basic Civil Rights. Enjoy.
Will you step forward, please? This kind of case, I'm glad to say, doesn't often come to my court. An injunction has been asked against this man who was peacefully distributing handbills. A great deal of authority, a great deal of responsibility is placed in our police and in our judges. This authority can be misused. I'm glad that a system of civil rights has been established by our citizens to protect all individuals. An injunction would be a clear infringement of this man's rights under law. Mr. Clerk, dismiss the complaint for injunction in this cause for want of equity.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. This honorable branch of the Circuit Court of Montgomery County is hereby adjourned. Your Honor.
Yes, sir. Oh, sure.
Your Honor, these young people have been waiting to see you. They're from the high school.
Well, what can I do here?
Your Honor, I'm Harry Andrews, and this is Ellen Jackson.
How do you do?
And this is Jeffrey Moore.
Hello, Jeff.
We're to make a report on civil rights, and, well, we'd like to talk to you about it.
Civil rights, eh? Yeah. Oh, get me my portfolio on civil rights, will you, Fred?
Yes.
Here, sit down, sit down. I saw you sitting in the courtroom this afternoon.
We were very interested in that last case, sir.
Because it concerns civil rights?
Well, yes, but, well...
Wait. Suppose you tell me just what are civil rights?
They include freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of conscience.
We know they're fundamental to our way of life.
And most of them are found in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, sometimes referred to as the Bill of Rights. They say that we're entitled to such rights as life, liberty, property, fair trial, and citizenship, and a lot more, and that they can't be denied to anyone. And some of those rights are found in earlier documents, such as the Declaration of Independence.
And I guess you can find people trying to do something about them all through history.
Well, isn't there any more to it than that?
Well, let's see. In this portfolio, I keep a record of what I consider to be the most important aspects of our rights. Civil rights. Civil rights defend the individual. They are interrelated. They are defended by ensuring them to others.
Could you explain those, Judge Copeland?
Civil rights defend the individual. Now, just what does that mean? You know, individuals sometimes need protection from private groups or other individuals or even from a hostile majority, and sometimes from the government itself. Now, our rights are organized to provide protection where protection is most needed. Here, let me show you this. Freedom to speak, worship, print, and assemble. And freedom to petition the government when you think you've been wronged. And to bear arms. No forced quartering of soldiers or searches and seizures without a warrant. Your life, liberty, or property cannot be taken from you without due process of law. The right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. The right not to be tried again on the same charge once you've been acquitted. No excessive bail and fines or cruel and unusual punishments. And our Bill of Rights also mentions that any other rights not mentioned are reserved to the people or the states where they live.
Well, now, some of the later amendments had something to do with rights, too, didn't they?
Well, yes, they do. These are the original rights that make up our Bill of Rights. The others follow more or less from them.
Judge Copeland, what about the trial? You said it had something to do with civil rights.
Indeed it did. If you'll think back, you'll find that civil rights were at work in today's case. Mr. Smith charged that the defendant, Nixon, was causing a public disturbance by passing out election handbills on a street corner. Nixon appeared in court. Our law permits him to appear before a court with all reasonable speed. This is one of the important rights guaranteed to every citizen by the Constitution. Nixon protested that he was being denied the right of freedom of the press. As you know, I denied the complaint for injunction. But suppose that Nixon had been charged with violating a statute of this state dealing with the distribution of handbills. Suppose that we had tried Nixon for violating that law. Then still more civil rights would have come to his protection. Something called due process of law, which we might say includes being informed of the nature and cause of the charges. Having the right to assistance of a lawyer to defend you. Having the right to enjoy an open trial by an impartial jury. Being confronted by witnesses against you and being allowed to present witnesses in your favor. And should you be convicted, the right to appeal your case to a higher court. Civil rights defend the individual. We're so used to enjoying civil rights, we're likely to forget how it would be without them. Try and picture how this trial might be run in a country where there are no civil rights. What are the charges, officer?
This man was passing out election handbills and littering up the streets.
Trying to influence our elections, eh?
Your Honor, regarding elections, I think...
You are not allowed to think about things that are contrary to the public good.
But, Your Honor, I merely wanted to express my opinion.
The very idea of an individual expressing his opinion publicly about things related to elections. You not only expressed your thoughts, you put them in print.
Well, Your Honor, may I present witnesses?
Of course not.
May I ask for a trial by jury and a lawyer to defend me?
Certainly not. There is no defense. The court finds you guilty. Do you see what I mean? Without civil rights, your life, liberty, property could be taken away from you on a mere whim.
I'm glad that wasn't the way the trial actually took place.
Civil rights make that much difference?
Yes. Civil rights defend the individual. And here's another important point about them and about the trial you saw. Civil rights are interrelated. Now let's suppose again that Nixon were on trial for violating a state law. Now, of course, our aim would be to give a fair trial. After all, this is one of the man's civil rights. But how could it be given? Suppose the witness had not been allowed to talk. Or for that matter, suppose the lawyer were not allowed to speak freely in the man's defense. Could a fair trial have been achieved? No. The more you study civil rights, the more you will see that these rights depend upon one another. They are interrelated. Once you have gained one right, the others are more easily achieved.
Do you mean, Judge Copeland, that in order to pass out those handbills, this man had to have all of these rights?
Of course, Ellen. And that's got to be in our report.
Oh, no, it doesn't. Even if it's true, the class won't understand it. No, I won't let you put it in.
Oh, that's...
Now, wait a minute here. Order in the court. What's this third point here?
Civil rights are defended by ensuring them to others. What does that mean?
Each of you, especially Jeff here, seems to want to deny the others the right to state their opinions in this report that you're writing. But don't you see, if one of you forces the others to be silent, there's a possibility that somebody stronger or with more authority will come along and force you to be silent. Did you ever think of that, Jeff? If we all agree that each one has equal rights to state his opinion, then that danger doesn't exist.
I see. By protecting the rights of other people, we're really protecting our own.
Exactly. That's why we must constantly be on guard. If we are to keep our civil rights in good working condition, we must work to understand, protect, and extend them.
Extend them, Judge Copeland?
Yes. Our civil rights are growing. We've already achieved some goals, but there's a great deal more to be gained and worth gaining. Think how often civil rights plays a part in your everyday lives. And ask yourself if you're helping to understand, protect, and broaden them. Do you always respect other people's right to have their own opinion, no matter how wrong it may seem? To get together with others and say what they think? To be able to write and print what they believe, even if you disagree with it? Do you always respect others' rights to property, liberty, life, the rights of every member of the community? These rights and many others need to be understood, protected, and extended to every citizen. And each one of us can play an important part in supporting these rights. Our civil rights are always in danger. We may lose them unless you and every good citizen takes an active part in guaranteeing them. Here's something you can do. Be informed. Remember the civil rights we have. Find out what these rights are. Know them. Recognize them. Know how they operate. Be vigilant. Learn how these rights may be protected and how they may be abused. Finally, discuss civil rights. Help to inform other people. For it is only by a mutual understanding and supporting of civil rights that we can enjoy their benefits.
Oh boy. Alright, so my microphone flaked. Just, what's crazy is, like, I was watching it the whole time, and then it was just as the end came up, and then it flaked out. I'm like, ah. Anyhow, we're working on it. Working on trying to find a new solution. I have a lot of different pieces of hardware that I could try and see, and I don't know if it's an OS issue or OBS issue, or the microphone itself is beginning to crap out. So many things to think about. Yeah. That was great. That last film was awesome. I love films from 1950 because they're looking back at post-war. They're looking at the fact that we fought a world war because of despotic governments, and being aware of the fact that the United States could fall into a despotic situation. We don't know anything about that. But anyways, let's see. Let's watch. Behind me I have a film scanner, and I have a film set up on it, and it is, I don't know what this is about, but it's oh, that's weird. Huh. It says yeah, I don't know what's going on with this. Take 2 from the sea. Enjoy.
This is sound roll number 14. Wild sound effects for leaving the docks and heading out into the channel.
That voice you just heard belongs to David, the one with the beard and the stubborn look in his eye. He's my sound man. And that's me, Bart. We're making a film, and it's called Take Two from the Sea.
It all began back in Hollywood. The biggies at Universal Studios wanted to talk to Bart and me about making a movie. Since they refused to discuss the project over the phone, we could only assume that it was big, really big. Bart politely asked me to wait outside while he clinched the deal. He claimed that I looked unprofessional and potentially shifty. Bart has such a nice way of putting things. Hollywood isn't a bad place to be. You can always find a familiar face. When Bart walked outside, I knew instantly that the project was something beyond our wildest imaginations. And it was. Our assignment?
Clams and oysters. At least they gave us a big fancy camera van to travel around in. Since we knew nothing about clams and even less about oysters, we had no idea where to look for them. With a little research, we discovered that clams and oysters are found wherever salt and fresh water mix, in bays and estuaries on all coasts of the United States. So we started our search up the West Coast.
Hey, Bart. Yeah? Have you ever thought of the possible number of other things we could be making this film about?
We're not getting money to shoot other things.
High wire acts, lady wrestlers.
Well, yeah, I thought about it, but we got paid to make this film.
Okay, well, I want you to know, really, that the only reason I'm doing this is for the money.
David, I had no illusions about why you're in this film. I thought maybe our friendship might enter into it, our partnership.
Movies move. Clams and oysters don't move. They lay right on the bottom. They don't move from the time they're born.
You know something, David? You will pay for this abuse. You'll pay.
As long as I don't have to eat any oysters, Bart.
You will be up to your neck in oysters. Right up to the neck, David.
Well, Bart was right about that. We really got into it. At least Bart did. There were so many oysters on the flats that you could hardly move without stepping on them. But just as I predicted, the oysters were just lying there.
Walking around on those flats was kind of rough. But the same oysters I was stepping over that morning turned out to be a lot easier to harvest later that day at high tide.
What kind of oysters can we find on the West Coast?
Well, on the West Coast we have both the Olympias and the Pacific oysters. The Olympia oyster is an oyster native to this country, originating way back in the beginning of time. Our Pacific oyster is an oyster that was first brought into our country in the early 20s of a Japanese origin. This dredge that we're going out to now is a dredge that is harvesting Pacific oysters.
Pacific oysters.
Right.
Can you give me an idea how the dredge works, how it actually functions to get the oysters?
Well, it actually acts like a big vacuum sweeper. It just lifts the oysters up off the bottom onto a conveyor belt. The conveyor brings them on up to the surface, transferring them to a barge. We can harvest with the two men approximately 1,000 bushel an hour in a well-planted bed.
That sounds like a lot of oysters, and it is. But that was Pacific oysters.
Next we saw Olympia oysters, which are much smaller. They're considered quite a delicacy. Shucking them is easy when you know how. Olympia oysters are usually grown in oyster dikes, which are nothing but big, man-made tide pools.
What do the dikes do?
Well, the dikes provide protection from the extremes of heat and cold, like a cushion of protection of water at low tide.
See.
Further up the coast, we found another way to farm oysters, raft culture. In this method, they grow oysters on strings, which are hung from rafts. Because the oysters are stacked on top of each other, like apartments in a high-rise building, you can grow a lot more oysters in a smaller area. And because the oysters are floating in the plankton zone, they get more food. This makes them grow faster and larger.
Even the son of an oyster farmer has to work up his courage before he can down his first raw oyster. That confirmed all my suspicions. Having learned all we could about West Coast oysters, we set out to investigate clams the next day. Bart figured he could do his preliminary research best from the back of a speedboat.
We finally located some clams on a nearby beach. I figured I could learn the most about West Coast clams from a man who really knows what clams are all about. Clams look different from oysters, but they're both bivalve shellfish. The generic name for them is mollusk.
This looks like a good spot. We'll try right here for some of our clams now.
What's the green stuff?
That's eel grass that I'm shoveling off. I can get down to where the clams are in this gravel. We've got butter clams, little necks, hard shells. Today we have about a -1 foot tide.
Well, what's this?
Oh, that's a cockle. Now, those are good eating. All the clams are very excellent eating, but a cockle is a little bit strong, so we always use that in chowder. We run it through a meat grinder and make it into chowder. That's a little neck. That's a good one. Here's another one. That's a butter clam there. That's a good steamer. Well, here's another larger butter clam. We'll use that for clam chowder.
Do clams make pearls, too?
Well, they make a pearl, but it's a very irregular pearl and not good in color. You have to have an oyster to make a real pearl that you can sell on the market. Yeah. Save that one. That'll make a good eating. We just got about enough in the bucket there for a good mess for you and I.
Those clams were really terrific. Digging your own makes them taste even better. But there's more than one way to get a clam. People who harvest clams for a living use more efficient methods. Like the oyster dredge we saw earlier, this clam dredge uses jets of water to stir up the bottom and lift the clams onto a conveyor belt.
When I heard about this process, I was skeptical, but it turns out the dredges don't hurt the bottom.
They find all sorts of clams on the West Coast. Caper clams, cockles, razor clams, butter clams, and geoducks. Geoducks are the largest and one of the most popular West Coast clams. Since they sort the clams by size, the men have to make several decisions a second.
The next day, we shipped all our exposed film back to Hollywood, said a little prayer, and headed across the Rockies to our next location, the Gulf Coast.
The first thing we had to get used to on the Gulf Coast was the pace of life down here. Oysters are the big thing on the Gulf Coast. David was still curious about why people go for oysters, so he decided to find out for himself.
Don't look at that camera.
Yeah.
You like oysters?
Yeah. Love them. Love oysters.
You like big oysters or small oysters?
Any kind.
Fried? Any way?
Raw.
Very
raw.
Preferred. Do you like oysters?
I love oysters, certainly.
What do you like about
I
them?
just love the freshness when they're nice and salty, especially. That's when they're the best.
What kind of oysters do you like?
All kinds.
I mean, you even like them raw?
Right.
You like raw oysters?
Right.
I eat oysters.
Do you like them?
Yeah.
How come?
Because they taste good.
Well, my father forced me to eat them.
Your father forced you to eat them?
Well, yeah, he said that, they really are good and you ought to try them. I didn't want to, so he said, try it. So I said, okay, and I really liked them then.
What about when you eat oysters? How many oysters do you eat at one time?
About at least a dozen.
Probably the most we ever had was about 10 dozen.
10 dozen?
Yeah.
You sat down and ate 10 dozen oysters at one time?
At one time, I could eat 3.
3? I just talked to a man that could eat 6 dozen.
6 dozen.
6 dozen. And then you can walk around ripping doors off and stuff like that after you eat that many oysters?
It all depends on the individual.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You know, is that true? I mean, you know, what's all this talk about oysters?
Oysters, they believe oysters has a tendency to build within themselves, you know.
Build what?
Build their nature up.
Let's get more specific. What nature? Mother Nature?
Mother Nature.
You mean it's make you stronger man?
Right.
I don't believe that. You know, I've heard the same thing 100 times, but I don't believe it's true.
Do you like oysters?
Yeah, I like oysters.
How come?
Because
They're good to eat. They're tasty.
if you don't like them, you don't like them. And if you'll get used to them, probably.
I don't think you can get used to an oyster. You either like it after you've tried it, or you don't.
I don't know, I got used to them. They're okay now. I think they were good.
Oh, yeah, I love the taste. They're really good. They taste very good. I just love them.
I like them.
The last person we interviewed turned out to be something of an expert. She said that if we really wanted to find out what oysters are all about, we'd have to try them ourselves. David had certain reservations.
Sure I had reservations. There's an old saying, he who ate the first raw oyster was a brave man. And I am not a brave man. Jean was a walking oyster encyclopedia, and Bart was really soaking it up.
It was nice to meet a girl who was so well-informed. Oysters, it turns out, are a very healthy food. She told us that they're high in protein and low in calories. They're in a class with milk. A half dozen oysters on the half shell, for example, contain only about 70 calories. Both oysters and clams give you a good supply of iron and vitamins. Oysters are full of all sorts of goodies that the body needs that you don't get from most other foods.
Funny, I never knew Bart was so interested in nutrition.
And the great thing about it all is that there are so many ways to prepare them.
Meanwhile, the moment of truth had arrived for me.
For some people, oysters take a little getting used to. Fortunately, David's uncouth reaction didn't keep Jean and me from enjoying a terrific dinner.
The next day, Bart planned to shoot a local oyster boat, and we headed out into the bayou country. Hey, Bart, this is at least the 10th time we've been over this bridge.
Sure, it's a pretty bridge, isn't it, Dave?
Look, I think it's a good idea to go out and shoot a clam barge. I think it's really a fine thing for this film. At the same time, I think it would be nice if we knew where we were going.
Follow the water.
There's water here, there's water over there, there's water all over this place. Haven't you been looking around?
Instead of tall stand of trees next to a sign for watch it. Next to a sign.
Why don't you look at your map there? Find it on the map. Come on, give me a break.
The map's not going to help us. And it's not a clam boat, Dave. It's an oyster barge. There are no clams.
Over there.
Just keep driving, please. Trust me. I will get you there.
How he got us there is another story. It was hotter than a steamed clam, so Bart rented a portable fan. We do everything first class.
Young oysters are harvested so they can be transplanted in a less crowded bed, where they'll grow better. Gulf Coast oysters are the same type as East Coast oysters. But since the water is warmer in the Gulf, the oysters mature in 2 years instead of 3. Normally, oysters grow about 1 inch a year. Because the water is low in salt, the clams and oysters here taste sweeter, less salty.
That makes sense. At first, Bart told me there were no clams down here, but he was wrong again. On the eastern part of the Gulf, they scoop up Venus sunray clams.
While we were shooting, David started picking up a strange sound on his earphones. At first, Dave thought it was another airboat, but it turned out to be a state inspector flying in to check the dredging operation. In every state where clams and oysters are harvested, there's a government organization that regulates the industry.
Inspection.
Like a lot of the other oystermen around here, the skipper is of Slavonian descent.
How's your oysters running? Kind of skinny, Max.
Going to be bedding from the natural seed ground when it opens up?
Yeah, we're going to bed a few for 1 month.
These inspectors do a lot to help the oystermen. They control the harvest to prevent depletion of the oyster beds. They inspect the waters where shellfish grow to make sure that it's clean. And they supervise the planting of oyster shells on which young oysters grow. We found out how that was done.
Several times a year, barges loaded with several tons of empty oyster shells are towed out to the bays, and the shells are scattered overboard. There's a method to this madness. Young oyster larvae are swimming around in the water, and they need something to latch onto in order to grow. The empty shells, called culch, provide the best home for the young oysters. If we didn't give oysters this helping hand, they'd probably have an even tougher time surviving.
Sailing back to port, I began to realize how many people go to a lot of trouble to make sure that oysters survive. I guess they must be worth it. Maybe I really hadn't given them a chance.
That evening, we headed up to the East Coast, where people have been eating clams and oysters for hundreds of years.
One of the oldest ways to gather clams is by raking for them in shallow water. But finding a clam raker wasn't as easy as we expected.
Who said it was going to be easy?
I think there's got to be another way to get out here, Bart.
No, I think this is it. I couldn't find any other way.
Does the guy get out here this way?
Yeah, the same way. If I could
No,
you in a hole,
he didn't come out this way. He does this every day?
A little further and we'll find him. We'll find him.
All right.
Up. All right.
Bart.
Don't hang on to me.
Okay, let's try to play this straight.
Try to play it straight. I play it just fine. Hi, how you doing? My name's Bart, and this is David.
Hi.
And, well, what we're doing is we're making a film about clams and oysters. If you wouldn't mind, we'd just like to take some footage of what you're doing. Is that okay?
Go ahead. Right ahead.
Well, that's great. Ready, Dave?
Sure.
Turn it on, Dave.
Okay, boss.
Some say the early settlers stayed close to the coast because they depended on clams and oysters to keep them alive during the long, hard winters. Standing there in our present condition, the icy waters swirling about our knees, it was easy to imagine what those winters must have been like.
So we vowed that from now on we would film clams under drier circumstances. The driest boat we could find was the soft clam dredge. Most soft clams are taken in northern New England in the Chesapeake Bay. Some people call them steamers. Soft clams are easy to spot because their necks stick out beyond their shells. Riding up the East Coast, we ran across another dredge. This one was harvesting hard clams. Since they get clams of all sizes out here, they are sorted by size as they come up out of the water.
Later on that day, we found out more about the different sizes of clams and what they're used for. The nice thing about digging your own clams is that you really work up an appetite that way. So they tell me.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Hello, hello. Hi, how you doing?
Hi.
Listen, you're not going to believe this, but we're taking some pictures, and we'd like to take some pictures of you and talk to you. Is that all right?
Yes.
It is?
Yes.
Great. Well, here's what we'll do. How about if you look right over there at that guy? If you look at him, he won't bite. You all set, Bart?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go.
Along the edge of the shore here, I believe there'd probably be a lot of different kinds of clams, right?
Yes, there's quite a few different kinds.
You want to tell me what they are?
Yes. You can find a little neck.
That's this one?
A small one, yes. Then the cherry stone, the next in size.
All right.
And the chowder clam.
Chowder clam's a big guy,
The larger one, yes.
If people were going to eat this little tiny one, this little neck, how would they eat it?
Raw.
And how about this one you call the cherry stone?
Raw and steamed.
And this one?
In chowder.
The big one's a chowder clam.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, cut.
By this time, I thought I'd seen every kind of clam there was, but there turned out to be yet another kind, the surf clam.
Using electronic depth recorders to find them, this surf clam dredge can scoop up clams when the ocean is 200 feet deep. Operating 30 miles off the Atlantic coast, this area is noted for its waves, called slow rollers. It takes about 20 minutes to fill the dredge, and in the meantime, there's nothing to do but lie around and try not to think about the slow rollers.
These were the biggest clams we'd seen yet. They must use them for chowder.
For once, David was right. They do use them to make chowder and minced clams.
People have been studying clams and oysters for a long time, but as we found out at a marine laboratory, there's always a lot more to learn.
What kind of work are you doing?
Bart, we're studying reproduction of oysters in the laboratory.
Reproduction. Then you have different sexes in here.
Yes, there are male and female oysters in this tank. In the spring of the year, the female release their eggs into the water, and the male release their sperms, and fertilization occurs.
What's the movement I see in there?
Well, what you're probably seeing are larval oysters that have arrived on the shell after several weeks of development through larval stages in the water, and we refer to them as spat.
Well, what happens to them? Do they all grow up?
Oh, no. Very few of those will survive. As a matter of fact, only 2 or 3 of them will actually develop into a full-grown oyster on that shell.
Well, how do you tell the difference between males and females?
Telling a male from a female oyster is a very difficult thing to do. As a matter of fact, an individual oyster, such as any one of these, could change its sex several times in its lifetime.
Change?
An oyster's lot is not a happy one. Besides the problems of changing its sex from time to time, an oyster has several natural enemies. Starfish can wipe out hundreds of acres of clams and oysters. The starfish just pry open the shell and suck out the clams and oysters.
The drill, as you might have guessed, actually drills a hole in the shell to get at its victim. It figures that these predators must be very fond of clams and oysters, since they go to such lengths to get them.
With all these predators, oysters need help to survive. Hatcheries are designed to do just that. The hatcheries do something they call aquaculture, which is a $3 word for oyster farming. What they do is experiment to find new ways to grow oysters, like growing them on plastic sheets. Once the oysters are old enough to fend for themselves, they are planted in oyster beds. A few months ago, I would have been surprised to see that they still use sailboats to get oysters, but nothing surprises me anymore. Bart said that I was going to be up to my neck in clams and oysters, and he was right. When we got back to Hollywood, Bart hit on the terrific idea of having a clam bake, kind of a promotional gig for the film. We needed to pick up a few things at the supermarket. I had no idea you could just go to the market and get clams and oysters. It's amazing what a variety of forms they come in.
Yeah, and they're so easy to fix, even David can do it.
With all the new methods of packaging clams and oysters, you can buy them any month of the year. There's an old myth that you shouldn't eat oysters in a month that has an R in it, but that's not true anymore.
In cans, you can get steamed clams, oyster bisque, oyster stew, New England clam chowder, and Manhattan clam chowder.
Frozen, you can get breaded clams, breaded oysters, oysters Mornay, oysters Rockefeller, and clams Casino.
And of course, you can get them fresh at the seafood counter. Fresh oysters and fresh clams. There, that should just about do it. When we finished the film, the big shots at the studio were very happy with it. They called us back because they had an even bigger project for us to tackle. I knew that this time it was something big. Really big, like, well, like whales.
Whales. So they're going to talk about whale farming and whale harvesting, and they're going to have whale bakes. What a fascinating film that was. I had no idea what that film was going to be. It came from, excuse me, a community college at the coast of North Carolina. So that's where the other films about nets and about learning knots came from. But yeah, about shellfish. Fascinating. And the take on it was just so weird. Like, all right, we're going to do this boring film about oysters and clams, and we're going to admit that it's boring right up front with one of the characters. And then we're going to make it about these personalities and about whether or not Bart will eat oysters. And then they both learn to love shellfish. Me, not a fan. Not a fan. But I am a fan of you guys watching and tuning in. And we both kind of premiered that together in the 21st century. We were there together watching that. And we can look back fondly and say, remember that time that we watched that film with Bart and that other guy? And they traveled across the country to film shellfish farming and harvesting. Anyways, if you like what you saw, or at least like the concept of what we're doing here, give us a thumbs up, or a like, or a subscribe. You can also go to ko-fi.com/avgeeks or patreon.com/avgeeks. Those are great ways to support us. Tomorrow I'm doing a live show. Besides doing the streaming show here, I'm also doing a live show at the Alamo in Raleigh. We're doing those excruciating 1980s. And right now, we've sold out. There's no seats left. But if you always check like 2 hours before, you might see that there's some free seats, because sometimes people can't make it. So keep an eye out. And we will be doing a show in May as well. But thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate your eyeballs, and we'll be back tomorrow on Tuesday. Everybody take care. Bye.